These are the lecture notes from chapter 35 on respiratory systems. Now, we will focus on the human respiratory system, but we will talk about, we will compare the human respiratory system to other animals. All right, so you definitely need to know all of the terms in red on this page. These are just, it's just terminology that you need to be familiar with. So, respiration is defined as the sequence of events that results in gas exchange between the body's cells and the environment. Now, when we talk about gas exchange, we're talking about two gases. We're talking about getting oxygen into our lungs and into our cells, and then carbon dioxide that is building up in our cells, we're trying to get that out because it is toxic. It is a waste. So the gas exchange is the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Now, the first time that we encounter oxygen and carbon dioxide is not technically gas exchange, but it's called breathing or ventilation. So ventilation and breathing are the same thing. And ventilation includes inhaling and exhaling, or the words that you tend to see in biology and anatomy classes are, instead of inhale, inspire, inspiration, and expiration. So ventilation is inspiring and expiring. It's breathing in and breathing out. So when we breathe in, we're taking in oxygen from the atmosphere, although there's a lot of other gases in the atmosphere, but the purpose of it is to take in the oxygen gas that's in the air. And then when we breathe out, we're exhaling all of that carbon dioxide that has built up in our tissues. When we use the terms respiration, there's external respiration and then there's internal respiration. External refers to gas exchange between the blood and the lungs. So there are blood capillaries that surround the little air sacs of the lungs called alveoli, and it's the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between those little tiny blood capillaries and the little tiny air sacs of the lungs. Then internal respiration is between the blood and the tissue fluid or the tissue cells. So what's happening in external respiration is oxygen is moving from the air sacs of the lungs into our blood vessels. Carbon dioxide is moving from our blood vessels into our lungs so that we can breathe it out. So that's external respiration between the blood vessels and the air sacs of the lungs. And internal is when the blood is carrying oxygen to the tissues and the cells of the tissues. And then the tissues are building up carbon dioxide and moving that into the blood. So that's internal respiration. And you can see them illustrated here. External respiration is referring to the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the blood and the lungs. And internal is between the tissue cells and the blood. All right. For external respiration to be effective, the gas exchange regions must be moist, thin, and large. They must have a large surface area. So the gas exchange region in external respiration for humans is the lining of the blood capillaries and the lining of the alveoli, the air sacs in the lungs. And where they connect is where oxygen and carbon dioxide is going to have to cross. So that region must be moist. It must be very thin because diffusion, for diffusion to occur across tissues, the tissues must be very thin. And the tissues of your blood capillaries and your alveoli are only one single cell thick. So they're simple squamous epithelial tissue. And then the surface area must be large. So the way that we get the surface area to be large is those little air sacs. There are like millions of them in each lung. So that increases the surface area. That makes the surface area large in relation to body size. It's by having all those little teeny tiny air sacs connected to blood capillaries. Okay. This slide is just comparing how difficult it is for animals that live on land to obtain oxygen from the air compared to aquatic animals. So it is more difficult for aquatic animals to obtain oxygen from the water than it is for terrestrial animals to obtain oxygen from the air. So aquatic animals expend a lot more energy on breathing than terrestrial animals do. This is showing you a hydra, which is a cnidarian, and it just exchanges gases through its tissue layers. Oxygen enters from the water, carbon dioxide leaves, across the cells of the body of the hydra. And the earthworm has a blood supply, so it exchanges gases with the air through its blood vessels. Now, terrestrial vertebrates, which include humans, have evolved lungs. Most amphibians respire to some extent through the skin because their lungs are so small and inefficient. So they use their skin also, and that is why their skin has to be moist. It's because that respiration membrane has to be moist. And air is a rich source of oxygen compared to the water. There's 20% of the gases in our air is oxygen. And then it's showing you here respiratory organs. Fish have gills. Some insects have trachea, a trachea system that connects to their exoskeleton through these little holes called spiracles. And then the trachea can actually directly enter cells and take the oxygen directly into cells and not through the blood, which is kind of really cool when you think about it. Mammals like dogs and humans have air sacs in their lungs called alveoli that are surrounded by blood capillaries, and that is their respiratory membrane, is where the blood vessels and the air sacs connect. The gills of bony fishes, bony fish have a gill cover called an opercula. So they breathe by opening their mouth and their operculum at the same time. Both of them open at the same time and close at the same time. And that's what causes breathing for them. And water passes over the gills in an opposite direction as the blood is flowing. So blood flows past the gills in one direction, and the water flows in the other direction. And that is called countercurrent exchange. And that allows for them to extract more oxygen from the water, so that the movement of the blood in the opposite direction as the water flowing past the gills, that allows for countercurrent exchange. And they get more oxygen from the water that way. Now in insects, insects have a tracheal system. They've got internal organs within their hemocoel cavity because they do have an open circulatory system. So that hemocoel contains blood and lymph. Their circulation is inefficient, but they do use a system of branched trachea, and each trachea has a branch that attaches to a cell. So the trachea can actually directly send oxygen to the mitochondria of the cells. And the oxygen comes into the insect's body at these little holes called spiracles, and then it enters the trachea. The trachea branch into tracheoles, and they actually connect directly to the body cells. And here you can see a spiracle, which is on the outside of the body, and that spiracle is connected to an air sac and a tracheole, and the air and the oxygen will be transported through the tracheoles directly to the insect's cells. So it bypasses the whole circulatory system part. Now, we're going to focus more on humans. So the human respiratory system includes all the structures that conduct air in a continuous path to and from the lungs. So it starts with your nasal cavity, your nostrils and your nasal cavity, and then your pharynx, which is a common pathway for air and food, and then into your larynx, your trachea, your bronchi, your bronchioles, and then the air sacs or alveoli. All right, so air passes from the pharynx or throat through the glottis, which is the opening to the larynx or voice box, And then from the larynx into the trachea is permanently held open by rings of cartilage, so that when you're swallowing food and all that, it's still going to be open. Because your esophagus can press against your trachea when you're swallowing food, but it just permanently is held open so that you can get air into your lungs. So these rings of cartilage permanently hold the trachea open. And then the glottis, which is the opening to the larynx and trachea, is closed by a flap called the epiglottis when you swallow. And so when you're swallowing food, the epiglottis closes over so that food can't go into your windpipe or your trachea. Now, to keep food from going into your nasal passages, that is your soft palate. So when you swallow, your soft palate in the back of your the roof of your mouth will close over the entrance to the pharynx from the nasal passages. It's called the nasopharynx, and it closes over that so that food doesn't go up your nose. And in both cases, when you're swallowing, food and drink can go up your nose and also into your windpipe if you're eating too fast, or you're trying to talk or sing or laugh when you're eating or drinking. We've all done that. But most of the time, those two processes work, where the soft palate closes over and the epiglottis closes over. The trachea divides and forms into the two primary bronchi, and each primary bronchus supplies a lung. So you have a right primary bronchus and a left primary bronchus. Then the bronchi will branch into bronchioles, kind of like arteries branch into arterioles. And those bronchioles will branch and branch until they finally end in an air sac called an alveoli. And then the alveoli are surrounded by capillaries, and where they connect, that's where external respiration occurs. So this shows you a picture of the alveoli kind of look like a cluster of grapes, but it shows you a picture of all the capillaries that surround and contact those air sacs or alveoli. And that is where external respiration occurs. It's right there at the alveoli, between the alveoli and the capillaries. Oxygen moves into the blood and carbon dioxide moves into the alveoli. Now, in mammals, inspiration or inhaling uses negative pressure. What happens is that first of all, you need to understand a pressure and volume law is that as the volume in our chest increases, the pressure decreases. So volume and pressure have an inverse relationship. It's called Boyle's law. So when we inhale and our rib cage moves up and out, it expands. Our diaphragm moves down and flattens out. It gives us a lot more greater volume inside of our chest cavity, and increasing the volume decreases the pressure. So because the pressure is low, then atmospheric pressure pushes air into our lungs. It says here, as the thoracic cavity expands and lung volume increases, pressure decreases. So when the lung volume increases, pressure decreases. It's an inverse relationship. And that means that the pressure in our lungs is less than atmospheric pressure. So the atmospheric pressure, which is greater, forces air into our lungs. That's how we breathe in. Then when we breathe out, expiration, all of those muscles we just contracted to inhale, the muscles in our ribs and the diaphragm muscle, they all relax. Expiration is when it's just a passive expiration, when you're breathing out and you're not really using any effort. That is a passive process. So all those muscles that were used to inhale, they just relax. That causes the rib cage to shrink, to move down and in. And the diaphragm relaxes and moves up. So it pushes up into the chest cavity when it relaxes. It's like a bell shape. Well, that decreases the volume inside of the lungs, inside of the chest cavity, and decreasing that volume increases the pressure, because remember, they're inversely related. So because the pressure increases inside of our lungs, it causes that increased pressure causes it to push air out of our lungs, and we breathe out. And here is a picture showing you what happens when you inhale. This little dotted line represents your chest cavity. The volume in your chest cavity increases, the pressure decreases, and that's going to cause air to come in. The atmospheric pressure will move air into your lungs, and that will cause you to inhale. Then when you exhale, the volume in your chest cavity decreases, so the pressure increases, and you push the air out. And this shows a picture of what it all looks like when you're inhaling. Your ribs expand, your diaphragm flattens out, and so that volume inside of that chest cavity increases, pressure decreases, air comes in. Excuse me. Then when the diaphragm relaxes, it actually forms a bell and moves up into your chest. Your ribs kind of move down and in, so you have less volume in your chest cavity, which increases the pressure, and the air is pushed out. So that is how inspiration and expiration during ventilation or breathing, that's how all of that works.